Okay, here's one on a special site of ancient Egypt, and we'll get into how it talks about one certain person. That's just one of many. This is a site known as Dier El Medina, and after early excavations, they realized that this had to do with a lot of tomb workers and so on, and eventually made the correlation that this is where the people lived that built all the tombs of the Valley of the Kings that we know of, from the famous 18th and 19th dynasty. In fact, who we're going to look at here shortly is spanning that epoch right there that's so famous in ancient Egypt. So you look down upon this, and it's kind of a city slash village or whatever where these people lived, and it concentrated heavily on architecture. The people that were scribes and painted the actual Egyptian tombs and built them itself. The whole slew that makes that up. In fact, it looks like this city was made and built up from a point to actually facilitate this workmanship in the Valley of the Kings, like where King Tut's buried and so many others. So let's take a look at this a little bit and try to get an idea of what's been shown here, and then we're going to concentrate on one certain guy's tomb that's known here. So if you've read certain literature, you'll probably hear about this, but if you haven't, you probably won't. One place you could find information about this is from a book called Ancient Lives, The Story of the Pharaohs' Tomb Makers by John Romer. But then again, if you haven't gotten into this aspect of it or where they come from, you won't know this information. So we'll get into it a little bit, and again, specialize on one person that's in here, and he's known as Paneb. He was one of the major artists known to be hooked up with these ancient Theban tombs. When you look at ancient Egyptian art, it all seems to have that same effect, and of course, one half their body's twisted one way to the shoulder, the eyes are shown as showing forward, but their face is sideways, all these things that are kind of strange. But what's strange about these artist depictions that are here is the hands to me. For if you look at them, they have extremely elongated hands. And then where the thumb attaches, there's no meat in between that. It almost looks like a crab claw. I don't know if you've noticed it yet or not, but this guy's not drawn with a real dark red ochre. He's drawn with a yellow ochre that seems to have a slight tinge within it. And of course, the blotchy effect there is the blotchy effect that you see in the white areas that are over there beside it too, of a mold that kind of grew and blotched it up and oxidized it pretty well. But have you noticed that he has a kind of blondish strawberry red hair, even though it appears to be a wig? We'll get into that a little more here, because this guy's got quite a bit of information. And in this little town here, as they've excavated it out, they found a lot of things. And again, these are the people that made those famous tombs that we're looking at whenever you talk about the Valley of the Kings through this area. And there's a lot of scribal material that goes along with it, because there were major scribes in there at the time. And of course, there's some political stuff that goes on. We'll kind of get into that, but not too deep in this next little part. But there's a lot of this scribal stuff, and it's kind of fleshed out and shown these people and what went on. Now, Paneb that's shown here has a red-headed appearance to him, and he's drawn more light with a yellow ochre instead of a red ochre. So there's a few times that the Egyptians show this different depiction, other than the one that we all commonly know, where they're more of a red ochre type males and a real pale females and pale priests, which usually don't show any hair at all, showing their ritual purity of actually shaving twice a day, it said. And that's not something that was said during just one little time, but from the Wayback Machine all the way through. I don't know if you can notice his phenotype that's here and the way that he looks, but this is a Caucasian. And of course there's ancient Berbers that I've shown you before that still exist, of the Amazigh type people of North Africa, that still show blonde and red hair and blue eyes and so on, that are connected from the Wayback Machine. People have over the years tried to say things that discredit them and all kinds of things, or just really act ambiguous and not refer to it. But when archaeology stepped up to the point, they proved that these people have been here for many thousands of years, and they're the endemic people of North Africa. But that's the Berbers. But if you look into this deep enough, I mean, here we were talking about Paneb, and he's spanning the 19th into the 20th dynasty, and apparently in effect during the time of Seti II. Because there are references to that we'll get into in a minute. But if you've ever looked into Egyptology whatsoever in that, you've probably, one of the major people other than King Tut, which is back in the 18th dynasty, you'll find out during the 19th and the earliest part of that, there was Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great. Then Seti after that, and so on. You get to the point here where it's Seti II's reign, and this is one of the major artists that's still doing this work in the Valley of the Kings that we all know. We'll look at a few other depictions here because he's got a little strange tomb that is a little bit different, of course, and it's not a pharaoh's tomb, but this is during a point where even high viziers and nobility and so on are getting tombs, and it kind of makes sense that these people that do all this artwork and stuff for the kings would end up having pretty decent artwork done there. In fact, the belief in all these tombs that we find of this is that the major people, the major artists of the time are doing it. One way of telling this easily is if you've looked into the artwork at all, quite often there is a artwork depiction drawn in black, and then there might even be, after that, a secondary scribe that comes in, or somebody that's actually the foreman situation of it, or the one that's in charge of it, and he'll change and make little outlines that show it to be a little different. It's kind of rare to find that in some of the tombs because they're supposed to finish this thing off totally. When they finish it off totally, they plaster the wall and paint it over, and then whenever that scribal secondary thing comes in, they actually fix the artwork to the way that the foreman said they wanted it to do. So that's one way that they kept this constant look through the whole time of a huge expanse of time, which is pretty much unique in ancient times. But Paneb here has a few issues with him, and of course if we didn't have that, we probably wouldn't understand it all. This is known as SLT, or Salt 124. It's a papyrus here that's shown, and if you look at the lines of stuff that's on here, this is where Paneb is actually being accused of quite a few things. In fact, he's being accused here that he stole from the Egyptian tombs of the kings some goods that were supposed to go to that and to the family, indicating that during the time all this happens, there's some other things that go to the family, and he was said to have picked through that. So that's another bad thing here, but there's an incredible list here, and I know I've seen it before. But he also stole some of the equipment that's there, some of the stonework supposedly that goes into the ancient Theban tombs, and used it on his own, it was said. So this guy's pulling out a whole lot of stops here, but later we'll find out why this guy is pretty much biased and why he's giving his point of view. Pretty crazy story whenever you get down to it. So here we're looking at his tomb, and it just has this arch ceiling into it and almost looks like an ancient Mithraeum. But you can see here that instead of being red ochre males and pale females in this Theban tomb, where they're given a little bit of artistic license here, they have pale males and pale females. She's drawn with a blonde type of hair, and he's drawn with a red type of hair. That may not make sense to many people if you're not well into it, but if you watch some of my recent videos, it shows you that, yeah, that does make sense. Now, how far does it go back? Well, pre-dynastic times, there's Ginger, the blondish red-haired pre-dynastic Ghibelline mummy. So we would say well before Egypt was even Egypt or come together in any way, well preemptive to Narmer, but all the way through. You can also find Khufu's granddaughter shown as a redhead and so on too. And I used to have a list, if you've been with me a few years, at one point here I had a list of like 277, 278, I forget exactly the number now off the top of my head, of all these tombs that were shown that actually show blonde or red-headed people and not dark-headed people all over Egypt. Well, we found out whenever I went into it a few times that number 37 and number 48 were exactly the same tomb, and it was this wall and forward of you claiming it as one, and on the left-hand side here showing you another depiction was another number in there. So that's really incorrect whenever it said there's this many tombs, because in some of these tomb situations it's on this wall, it's on that wall, and this one, if you go down the hallway and look here, it's got it too. So there might be 2 or 3 places that are shown here to actually show these depictions. That might not make sense to a lot of people either, but if you watch some of my recent videos, some of my mid, some of my old videos, I actually show you that there was a Nordic type of presence of people that were in ancient Egypt preemptive to it even starting. In fact, with Egyptologist 7 recently doing a debunk on a guy where she found his information, and it was from a paper preemptive to World War II, it shows you that they are talking about this nobility that had a Nordic type skull to it. This is well before genetics or anything, which has confirmed the reality of that. But it's well before genetics or anything, and so they're going off of facial structure, bone structure, and then of course the skulls of certain people match up to certain people and don't match up to others. And it's looked like there was a major Mediterranean type people influence in ancient Egypt and Near Easterns, all that we have off there, and then genetics confirms that. But it also confirms the fact that there's a lot of that Nordic types in there too. One thing that would be real famous is if we just mentioned that King Tut and Akhenaten have shown up to be R1b genetics. And if you look at that connective, it connects all of these ancient Aryan type people, but then also equals to about 80% of West European type people of today. So extreme common connection there. And of course concentrated in the nobility. And let me say straight out, the nobility are all these scribes, from stonemasons to everything else. And you can imagine in the earliest of dynasties, it might not have been so much of a blanket, but at one period of time here, it got to be a blanket over all nobility. There was a caste system type that was going on in ancient Egypt that a lot of people don't refer to, but I guess that the proof and the showing of the selections of that is for other videos. We'll get into that a little bit more too with Paneb, but so he's accused of all these things that are here and more, by the way. We'll look closely at some of these pictures. I believe the first one is this top left one here, and then we'll look at this picture here towards the end of it and so on here. But common motifs. They're showing these ancient tubes and all of the Book of the Dead and type writings that are all drawn up in the top portion all across the sky and so on. And of course this is all plastered with something that's halfway between wall plaster of today and concrete, because some of it lasts an incredibly long time. But after they smooth all the wall down, they would smear it off with this plaster type thing and they do all these drawings. And again, because a major scribe was doing this in the first place and they're all hooked up with, these are the people that do this. There's not a secondary coming back over and correcting in any way. In fact, you would have to believe that there might have been conversations about what pictures he would have in certain places and all set up, and then that was scribed down on something and then utilized by the major guy whenever he built it. Just makes more sense than anything. But Paneb got into a few bits of trouble here where they said he did all these other things, but then it's also said in these accusations that he took common workers and even their wives and had them do all kinds of things and chores for him and hook up things at his house and all kinds of things like that, but even to the point of weaving fabrics and stuff. Now, of course, maybe one of these people was making a shirt. He saw it and he turned around and said, "You made me a shirt like that?" Of course, so some of these things could be taken out of context. We'll look at it in a minute and how this might be somewhat biased. This is the tomb of Seti II, and one of his accusations said that he sat upon this, so you can imagine him sitting around on the rim or something, or maybe up on top of it totally. And he sat and drank wine on that. You wouldn't think that be too bad, but if you think about it, it'd be a blasphemous type moment where you're not doing something that's sacred and all hooked up with the things, but you just decide to kick back and drink wine sitting on his casket, you know. So there's quite a few things that are in here, and then whenever people looked into this, and of course they found a lot of these records, this is one guy that they have a lot of connections for, and they can show you this weird thing that goes on here, and of course some of the political looks on it. So as I described, we're looking at this here again and again. If you look at their thumbs and the way they are with their hands, that's pretty weird. But if you look, he's drawn as a redhead. She, his wife, is drawn as a blonde-haired type person. Of course, if you look at the grandparents of Amenacht and so on, that's Thuya and Yuya. They're more stark blondes. And again, it goes back to pre-dynastic times. There's not any foolish lie about how it changed or it did something else. In fact, whenever they did the ancient genetic study here out of the ancient necropolis that they had, they got hundreds of people and spanning over a large time, and what they thought they were going to see how it changed whenever Egypt did finally fall to other people, like the Persians. A lot of people aren't aware that they fell to the Libyans for a little bit of time, but then also a concept of the Hyksos coming in, and then eventual Romans. And what they found out was, even though that all happened, it really didn't change it any at all. In fact, where it changes is post-Roman times and after. And I could show you along with this video, but let me just say it's easy enough for you to find yourself, where the comment is given that the current population has about a 1% connection to the ancient Egyptians that they find the genetics of, and that the closest people that are related to those are current modern Western Europeans, i.e. as what's shown with King Tut's DNA, Y DNA, MNT DNA. But in the same breath, we're not saying the Nordics came down and did this, for they'd been there a long time. So what you think of as a Nordic type people is a little bit different. And it's easily shown that these Nordic type people were in all of these civilizations, and strangely it shows it in the nobility. From ancient India, from Sumer, from the Holy Land, ancient Anatolia, Egypt, quite a few places, which is real revealing whenever you actually find out about it. But she's got this lotus on her head too, and that has something to do with the afterlife and all of this type stuff. And it's an intoxicant, by the way. But he can easily be seen that even though it chipped away in a lot of places, you can still tell him totally and her totally in this tomb that was found of Paneb, who has all these kinds of accusations against him. I mean, it's quite a list. But there's one time where he supposedly tried to kill this other guy. I believe his name is Neferhotep, and he was the major artistic scribe in the way or whatever. And in the process of him chasing around the city, apparently this man here got involved with people trying to help him out from getting his ass whooped by the red-headed guy that we were just showing here. And apparently in the description what he's accused of, it actually says that he beat up 9 different people. So that's real telling right there. But it gets worse and even deeper. Hold on. So this guy that was accusing him of it here had actually gone to the Visier. Now this is like a local ruler or governor, if you will, and so on like that. And in doing so, he put a complaint onto that person. But then lo and behold, this man here, the accused, stepped right over him and went directly to the pharaoh. And in the process of the investigation that was done here, that Visier lost his job. Apparently he put it on the line and was found that no, you believed a few people that cannot be proven to be true. There's other people that contradict this situation, and this guy that we're looking into deeply here apparently was exonerated of any of those things, of his accusations. Kind of makes you think of Trump and things like that and whatever too, but here he is again, of course, strong with the red hair type of appearance here, and giving a libation to a god. Here's that other picture I was telling you about over on the left-hand wall, I believe it was shown here, and you can see him and his phenotype in her. I don't know what it is. I think it's really the nose and the way the nostril comes forward on it, but this ends up looking almost like Peter Frampton from the old back days and stuff like that. And you can see he's drawn with red hair, but she's drawn with blonde type of hair. So he had this Visier end up losing his job for it, and so that's quite telling. You can look into this and it'll show you this list that's done here, and I don't want to end up getting all of it exposed here or go down a series of lists and maybe tell you what I think about each thing. There's real no reason to do this, but this guy that's here, known as Amenacht, is the guy that's trying to make all these accusations on the paper that I saw before, and this is from his own tomb that's shown is here. But in that fact here, he actually says that Paneb actually bribed the Visier, which apparently is the guy that lost his job too, so maybe that has something to do with it, to end up becoming one of the high scribes of the area, or be one of the top people in this artistic work that goes on in the land of the king. So real political here going on, but we can also see, because of this fact of what we're talking about, this guy says he was the one that was supposed to get the job, and that it was stolen from him by Paneb, and he did all these things that were real bad. In fact, he actually bribed the people to get his job and all this type of stuff. So he kind of put it on the line too. But we can also see that, yeah, you might have an ulterior motive going on here, and sounds a little biased, especially when you threw in that reason to be biased about it. Pretty crazy. But so all these depictions that are shown here, and of course you see that Egyptians usually some with these black wigs on like this, but if you simply go to Wiki and just go to hair, like what all they can say about hair, you'll find that it's all been reclassified by Oprah Winfrey's barber somehow, like he's a scientist, but a lot of people have agreed kind of with his concepts on different people's hair types and so on, which actually, if you look into it, throws everything off. But or at least what people are tried to lead to believe at this point. But in doing so, if you'll go down to curly here, and you think you might be looking at something that's real curly, Shirley Temple, almost the edge of a fro or whatever, you end up finding something that looks like a Farrah Fawcett hairdo, Raquel Welch, or whatever, this wavy type of hair that we all know about. And they show you that there's a blonde scalp, much like Thuya and Yuya in the stark blondness, and that blonde scalp was found up under a black wig, which is kind of real telling. But then again, most every visage that you see of the ancient Egyptians are shown with dark wigs. Makes you wonder what color of hair they would have actually naturally have. Looking at the genetics and so on of the nobility, leading all the way through, we find that there would have been a whole lot more redheads and blonde-headed type people. In fact, that paper I referred to that Egyptologist 7 did the debunk on, where she takes his own paper and says, that's not what your paper says. In fact, strangely, looking into that paper, it tells you that there were Nordics and Mediterranean types and so on going on, and that they were there of the earliest dynasties and around the time of making the periods or so on, and it kind of flip-flopped around with the Mediterranean type people during the intermediate periods and so on, but really comes back to its former glory of the earliest dynasties around the 18th and 19th dynasties, which we're looking at here, and these Nordic type people who end up taking it over. And of course this is post Hyksos and so on, but genetics showed nothing changed during that time. And lo and behold, here we see another depiction of these people, where Paneb here in the center is redhead, the girl on the right hand side is a blonde, but somebody else that's real important, I don't know who it refers to here, is another redheaded. But looking at the leopard skin and so on that's what that, isn't this supposed to be an elder goddess that's leading him to the gods? Is this Isis shown with red hair, or Nephthys? I mean, who could this actually be? We can go down a rabbit hole and find out more about it, but I think it's pretty easy to see the phenotype of Egyptians here going on, regardless of hair color. But again, I used to have a list of 170 something different tombs, or 270 different tombs that are shown with depictions like this. Of course, this one probably would have been listed 2 or 3 times on that because it's on every wall. In fact, there's a little artistic license that goes on during the Marna period that most people are aware of, and how they changed the look of everything. But then in a modern time, we're looking back at it and we go, well, during this time, the scribes and everything went a little off in left field from what everybody normally had in their tombs. This can easily be understood, and of course, these are the artists that are doing all the king's tombs and stuff going on here. So that's right, revealing in itself, isn't it? Anyhow, let me know what you think about Paneb here and his idea, and of course all his accusations. I'm sure there might have been something that happened or so on. Oh, another thing I didn't mention before. Somebody said that he was trying to throw big bricks down onto people from the wall at one time. His accusation is that he was throwing bricks down upon workers or something at the wall, going crazy. So they try to pinpoint this guy as a guy that go a little mad, a little crazy sometimes, or real pissed off whenever he goes there, and watch out. Whooped 9 people one time trying to chase down the Visier that's there, and then when the Visier complained, he stepped right over him, talked to the pharaoh personally. Apparently there's some investigation, and then lo and behold, that Visier loses his job. And then they validated that or verified that situation, because the next Visier thing that's shown in the next artwork past this point has a totally different name. Whoops. Anyhow, moving on to another selection here, but just thought I would show this to you. This is something that if I still had that list of 277 tombs, I would have gotten to probably 1.5 years, 2 years ago. I thought about slowly through me doing all the other videos that I do, that occasionally I'll just start throwing one in, but then my computer crashed and I can't remember or actually find at this point where that guy on his own little website type of thing had ended up compiling all the pictures. It was pretty neat when you found out that's a current Egyptian that's there living in Egypt that was compiling this here, because he went around all these different tombs, he wrote it down and so on, and then made a list of it where there are blonde and red-headed people all over Egypt, when apparently he's not blonde or red-headed. You don't really find that so much in Egypt nowadays. Well, that's one of the reasons they say the current population has a 1% connection to the ancient Egyptians, because there's a lot of genetics in the ancient Egyptians that show this type of people we're exactly looking at, and that's not really in effect anymore. People try to blame that on the Arabs and so on, but from my understanding, there's only about a 16% Arab thing going on now, so that does twist it away a little bit. But that and other factors end up making it to where the current population has about a 1% connection, mainly in the Coptics, I always try to mention, to the ancient Egyptians. We just simply look at what the common haplotypes are now and so on, or if they have blonde and red hair or blue eyes and so on. And I'm not indicating that every single one of them did, and of course artwork would say that they didn't. But then again, if you wiki hair, you'll find out maybe some of these blonde curly-haired ladies used to put on black wigs. Just like in a modern time, it's a little more apropos for them to put on blonde wigs. Now, isn't it? Let me know what you think down below. Peace.